the land, quite broadly. And yet we pin our hopes on SMEs to save the day when SMEs have not necessarily had an environment that's conducive for them to thrive. Give me your perspective on what our challenges are and therefore where the SME sits in all of this.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's really an honor for me to share this platform with Mr. Mothiba. And of course, always very nice talking to you, Zanele. So thank you very much again. I think it's important to understand the context on what is going on internationally as well what is going on locally, and to understand where the world economy finds itself. What is happening internationally is that the world economy is actually doing very well, and that governments internationally are really going out of their way to stimulate the economies. I'm referring to the big economies like the Europeans and the Americans and the Chinese and so on. But additionally to that, we're seeing some significant technological changes taking place as well. Now, what you and I are doing now, typically this kind of conference will happen in person. It is not happening in person because of things like the lockdown, but also because of technological changes. And the lockdown actually accelerated many of these things that were in place already, like exactly what we're doing now, or things like, for example, working from home. People are buying, you just mentioned Takealot. People are buying on Takealot. Everybody's an expert on Teams or Zoom. Those are the kind of underlying trends that have been apparent and is simply being accelerated by the lockdown. In South Africa itself, the average South African has been not doing that well economically the past, nearly 10 years. And on a per capita basis, we've been getting poorer every year. So, and of course, in this kind of environment, I think we have to make a distinction between two things. The one is that small businesses are quite often created because people need to survive one way or the other, and they can't get accommodated in the normal, let's call it the mainstream economy. That's one reason why small businesses are important, simply to keep people alive. But there's another aspect to small businesses as well, and that is that small businesses quite often in South Africa, nowadays anyway, and globally, it's not only in South Africa, get involved in the modern kind of economy. But in order for you to get involved in the modern economy and what we call the gig economy or the tech economy, if you like, there are a couple of requirements. One requirement, certainly, where you're falling very far short on that one, is the requirement of the necessary skills. So I'm afraid to say, looking at South Africa's education system, for instance, we are not very good at creating skills or to teaching people how to participate in a modern economy. So that's one requirement, the necessary skills, and we're falling very far short in that specific one. The other one has to do with things like, for example, hardware. You need a computer, and you need, and of course, very importantly, you need to have a proper connection. I am very excited about that part of the economy, because worldwide, that is exactly what is happening. And if we want to participate in South Africa and to really play our part in that part of the economy, it is important for us to start where it really matters, and that is with skills development. The other part of the small business, I think the biggest challenge there has to do with local authority. If you want to start a small business somewhere, usually your first port of contact with an authority is the local authorities. Now, we've just had the release of the Auditor General's report on local authorities in South Africa, and we have to admit that there's a major crisis at the local authority level, and we need to do something to fix that, because if we can't fix that, then of course it will be very difficult, especially for smaller businesses, to get going. And maybe just a last comment that I would want to make about small businesses. The small businesses are very important for the reasons that I've mentioned. But there's one thing about small businesses that we quite often forget, and that is people think a small business is a romantic idea. It's nice to run a small business, but the contribution of small businesses to the economy is actually not that much. The reality is that small businesses hardly pay any taxes or very little. The reality is that small businesses do not employ many people. And the most important part of a small business is that it can eventually grow into a medium-sized business and into a bigger business. And that is another approach that we have to follow. Apart from the tech part and the skills part, we have to create an environment not only for small businesses to be established, but to create an opportunity for small businesses to grow bigger, to become part of the mainstream economy eventually as well.
Thank you, Dawie. I'm going to come back to some of the stuff that you're talking about and talk about enterprise development hubs or initiatives and examples where we've seen how big businesses have enabled not just small businesses, but medium-sized, proper little entities that can employ, that can recruit. Because I think that there's a tool and a model there that we're really missing. But I think you've said so much that's interesting. I want to go straight through to you, Mr. Mothiba. What are some of your thoughts around what Dawie has mentioned, and also your perspectives on the strategies we have as a country to enable the SME?
Thank you, Zanele. I think Dawie mentioned one aspect about the strategic importance of small enterprises, particularly at the level of economic growth, but then at the second level, as an employment creator. And we have been grappling with this as a productivity center to say, what is the landscape, particularly in the world and in South Africa, of small enterprises? And there's enough evidence that suggests that small enterprises are a backbone and productive drivers of innovation and inclusive growth. Now, if we start just from there, that they are productive drivers of innovation and economic growth, then the issues that Dawie reflected on around technology as an enabler for innovation becomes critical. And secondly, if then we agree that they have a potential for a multiplier in terms of employment growth, if appropriately supported, then we would achieve our NDP goal of saying small enterprises are the future, and that's where employment should flow from. Now, the South African challenge, which I think I want to put on the table, is the dual nature of our economy. The majority of our small enterprises, unfortunately, are in the informal economy. And there's a lot of things that are happening there, apart from issues relating to access to infrastructure, access to government support, which is very disintegrated. They also face their own challenges of productivity. And that links to the issue of skills that we've mentioned, that we don't have an integrated approach to supporting small enterprises as government in this country. We have a productivity center. Productivity, as I said, does a lot of work with small enterprises. But we're doing it in isolation of what SEDA does, in isolation of what the Technology Innovation Agency does. And you'll find the same situation happening everywhere across the country in terms of the various government departments, as well as the private sector. Now, one issue that is emerging is we're advancing a nationwide holistic approach to productivity because we believe it is a driver of sustained competitiveness and enterprise sustainability. Secondly, we believe that it is important that when we talk about funding for enterprises, particularly small enterprises, government, as a funder of first resort, should link funding to outcomes. And in this instance, capability of enterprises to be productive, to utilize resources optimally, so that they can be able to make profit, as well as the ability to reinvest some of the profits for employment, for growth of the enterprises, and as they grow, they will employ more people. And thirdly, the issue that Dawie raised of skills. The challenge we're sitting with is currently we have what we call employer-employee assistance, temporary assistance schemes. And this sort of worked well during the COVID, which was referred to as COVID temporary employer-employee relief scheme. But we have not come up to sit down as a country and say, having identified the growth, the sectors with the growth potential as captured in the sector master plans, what is our growth strategy in terms of skilling for the future, for purposes of transitioning these enterprises into the mainstream economy? So those are the few things that I just felt I should upfront put on the table.
Thank you so much. And I think you've raised an interesting point for me. I'm a little bit concerned that there is so much to tackle with this topic. But Dawie, you already really had difficulty in gaining confidence or giving confidence in the economic recovery plan to begin with. Does this somehow also, for us to be putting our hopes on SMEs and all the plans around the SMEs, when the economic recovery plan is also not clear? I don't understand how one can be successful when the other one is not yet in motion as it should be.
Zanele, I'm very sorry, but I lost the last question a little bit. If you don't mind repeating that, please.
I think, yes, more than a pleasure. So my question is, we are putting our hopes on SMEs and the recovery of SMEs and the role that they're playing, but the economic recovery plan itself has not gained momentum to give confidence. How do we look at one and not the other? Surely is the economic recovery plan much more critical to enable SMEs to thrive anyway?
Yeah, so what should the approach be? Well, Zanele, what we've seen the last couple of days, I think actually illustrate to a large extent what the biggest challenges to business in South Africa is. And obviously, small businesses, because of the size of the small businesses, they simply do not have the resources that bigger companies have. And what we see is warehouses being burned down, and we're seeing big shops being looted and all that. But we don't see the smaller businesses, which I'm pretty sure also lost hugely because of what we've seen recently. Government's got a certain plan, got an economic recovery plan. Government is providing certain assistance. Mr. Mothiba referred to some of these assistance that government is providing. But the reality is they're not very good at these sort of things. I think what we need to do is really to start where it really matters, and to decide and to discuss what the role and the function of government is. And the primary function of government is to provide law and order. That is what government is supposed to be doing. And that's certainly not the case what is happening. Secondly, what government needs to do is that government needs to look after our tax money and spend it in a wise manner. That is also not happening. I'm not even talking about things like, for example, assistance to small businesses and to job creation plans and all of that. We have to get the basics right. And we failing to get the basic rights here. So I would blame government for the state in which the South African economy is at the moment. And the primary thing is simply government not doing the basics right. So that's what we need to do. A second thing that we need to do is that we have to put the emphasis where it really matters. Now, the emphasis there should not be on job creation. Before I get into trouble, let me explain what I mean by that. It is the wrong approach. To get 1,000 people to dig 1,000 holes and another 1,000 people to fill it up again. We should not have job creation as an aim or as a goal. What we should have is to create an environment where businesses, especially smaller businesses, can thrive and jobs will happen. So instead of putting the emphasis on job creation, put the emphasis on wealth creation and jobs will follow as well. And I think those are the primary and the most important functions, or the primary and most important things on which you should concentrate. And I want to repeat what I've said earlier, and that is that if we look at it, you can't do this overnight, but it starts when it really matters. And it starts with skills development. And maybe we should move the emphasis away in South Africa from education and more to skills. We have this thing about the piece of paper in South Africa that you have to have a matric, for example, you have to have a qualification, but quite often people think that you have a piece of paper that you can actually do stuff. If you compare South Africa's education with the rest of the world, we are doing absolutely horrible. And it is going to take us at least 20 years to fix South Africa's education. We should have done this a long time ago. And instead of concentrating on a qualification, we need to concentrate on skills development. And I'm afraid there we are failing a large number of people in South Africa, that we're just not doing what we can do in order to do the necessary skills transfers. You can't participate in a modern economy if you don't have the necessary skills. So what we quite often see in South Africa now is that many people are getting involved in smaller businesses, not because they want to create wealth, but because they simply do not have a choice. And small business is quite often seen as a survival mechanism for many families in South Africa. It should be different. Sure, a small business should be a high-tech businesses with people with the necessary skills, which we simply do not have, and people that can do small businesses in a safe environment and an efficient environment, which we don't have at the moment either.
I could not agree with you more. To expect a grade 8 who's come out with a 40% or a 30% pass, or a matriculant to become an SME, their knowledge and what they have in order to be do your own business, don't rely on being employed. And this is what we often hear from the government. Or for people to, if they have a qualification, they're sitting at home, they're waiting to be employed, and we're saying start your business. You need training that enables you to understand how to run this business. Because what we'll end up having is a whole lot of small businesses that employ themselves, and can we really call that a business? However, it's not just government that's failed in training training the workforce. It's also corporate. Corporate hires you on a piece of paper. So if you look at any job spec that comes, the first thing they want is pieces of paper. They're not looking for skill. They're not looking for capability, competence, or exposure or experience. Corporate is saying, we want a piece of paper. And then secondly, corporate takes onboards people, but there's very little skilling. So you come in to do a job, and you only do the job, and you only learn how to do the job. You don't learn to do other jobs. You don't learn to look at the entire value chain and how you then get out. So when you do start a business, it's a meaningful business that can employ a number of people. Why are we failing to have strategies and organizations that see people as assets with skills that need to pass through our system in order for them to do greater things? What is this mindset or strategic thinking that I think is fundamentally problematic? It's a selfish one that hires you on a piece of paper and keeps you in that chair for as long as it can, and it does not want you to do anything else. Forbid you even become an entrepreneur while you're working in a South African organization. So I don't know, Mr. Mothiba, could you start off and see whether something resonates with you in that conversation?
I'll just give an indication of something that we just picked up. In June, the Institute of Management Development, which is Swiss-based, produced a global competitiveness report. The sad story about it was that out of 64 countries that are being measured in that study, South Africa came out 62. And when you look at what are the issues there, apart from our problems of unemployment and so on, one issue is exactly what you're saying, Zanele, the issue of skills and innovation. Now, surely, if we don't create, as Dawie said, what is important for us is to create an environment conducive for entrepreneurs and sustainable enterprises. Without that environment, unfortunately, entrepreneurs and enterprises will continue struggling. Now, that environment calls for a partnership in terms of skills development. It is both the responsibility of business and government to ensure that the citizens of this economy are properly trained. And that is why I was talking about the temporary employee relief scheme. Granted, we have done so well about ensuring that companies get relief during COVID. But what is important now is for us to say, what is this modern economy wanting? What type of workforce is this modern economy wanting? And then we start now to do that, to ensure that we put in place measures to train people in what the economy wants. We're now talking about the future of work. People are looking at work differently now. To the extent that it is important that we should capacitate our enterprises, we should capacitate our entrepreneurs and the workers with the right skills to ensure that we are able to meet the demands of this economy. So the issue of skilling cannot be overemphasized.
Yeah.
And that is why we, as a productivity center, are saying it cannot be done by Productivity South Africa alone that we capacitate enterprises, but we should also begin to say, what is the strategic role of business, the private sector, in this journey? What is the strategic role of our institutions of higher learning? Should we continue being trapped in the things that we were used to doing 5 years ago when this economy doesn't want them? And the answer is no. Therefore, it calls for the private sector, government, institutions of higher learning to put our heads together so that we come up with a grand skills plan for this country. And we cannot throw away the issue of innovation is becoming central. And that is where institutions like yours, CSIR, are very critical, as if we have to turn things around in this economy. And thirdly, surely it cannot happen if we don't measure the impact of our interventions.
Mm-hmm. Zanele?
Yes.
Yeah, if I can add to that, and maybe just something that we have to be aware of. And I experienced something that I would like to share with you, and I think this is a good example of how we can get small businesses going in South Africa. When we talk about small business in South Africa, usually people mean is that somebody is selling something somewhere. That is a small business. There's nothing wrong to have a small business selling stuff to people, but small business is much more than just selling tomatoes in a corner of the street somewhere. Small business also involves manufacturing. And I was in China some time ago, and I came across a family. There was a new factory built in this specific city, and the family bought, they weren't given, they bought a cubicle in this factory. And in this cubicle is a small cubicle. The grandmother and the daughter and her daughter, all three women in one family, work in this cubicle. And what they do, they solder small pieces of electronic stuff together and they sell it. They stay in this cubicle and they sell it on to the factory in which they are working. But this little cubicle belongs to them and they can do whatever they want to. They can either work there or they can stay at home or whatever they want to. They bought this cubicle, and these three women in this specific family work in this cubicle 24 hours a day in 8-hour shifts. So the three of them literally work in this cubicle 24 hours a day. Now, that is an example of a small business. Essentially what they are, they're part of a bigger structure, they're part of a factory, but they're responsible for their own production in that small cubicle which they bought. It is their property, and they're responsible for providing the necessary labor, and they've decided in their family to work this specific cubicle for 24 hours a day. Now, the reason why I mentioned this is, can something like this be done in South Africa? And the answer is probably no. It's not going to happen in South Africa because we will not be allowed to work for 24 hours a day. No, don't make a mistake, and I'm not saying that we should be working 24 hours a day. And of course, there are things like child labor and stuff like that which you have to consider as well. But the point I'm trying to make, is something like this in principle possible in South Africa? And the answer is no. It is not possible in South Africa because the legislation will probably prohibit this from happening. But we have to understand that South Africa is a poor country, and that there are certain rules and regulations that are typical in wealthy countries that we simply cannot apply in South Africa, because we have to get wealthy before we can implement these sort of standards that many other countries can afford. We cannot afford that. We cannot afford legislation in South Africa that protects labor to the extent it does, because quite often what happens, it simply discourages businesses to employ more people. So this example that I saw in China is something that stayed with me, and that's something that I would like to be implemented in South Africa as well. I'm not saying exploit people. I'm not saying let people work in horrible conditions. But what I am saying is that people, if you allow them to do that, they can be quite innovative, and they can actually look after themselves in this example that I've just mentioned as an example of that. Something that I don't think will happen in South Africa. And part of the reason for that, apart from skills, is the environment, the legislative environment, which will make it very difficult.
I love that example. I think Asia is probably one of the best examples, because that kind of a family, that kind of an initiative feeds the family, educates the children, takes them to university, puts a roof over their heads. Yeah. We seem to not. I've never heard somebody say we're a poor country. We don't say it often. We use opportunistic words. We're a land of opportunity. We are great. We've got great potential. We've got great resources. But we don't say we're a poor country. And we also don't want to behave as if we're a poor country. That's the looting we've seen in the last couple of days, where we create this economy of people that actually doesn't understand why they don't deserve to have that car, why they don't deserve to have that massive flat screen, and why people can get into roles and literally loot in the roles to live lifestyles that are far above what their paycheck actually allows. Now, where did we get this wrong? Why can we not accept that we're a poor country? And then on top of that, if we are a poor country, how does corporate also behave differently? Because what you're saying, there are various forms of that can take place. Many years ago, I worked for a very visionary leader, Sipho Sithole, who made the drivers of the company start their own business. And he enabled them to learn how to run this business. So when they were getting paid by the business, he then said, start your own entity. He did that even with myself, sent me off to Sweden to run my own consulting practice for the company instead of being an HR administrator. It can be done. What can corporate do? And how do we change this mindset of poor people living rich?
I think it comes from when we are talking about South Africa full of possibilities and opportunities. But the reality is we as we do all these things, we haven't come to the realization and acceptance that we actually are a developing economy. That's a reality we cannot take away. And the moment we accept that we are an emerging and developing economy, and also accept that the majority of our enterprises or small businesses in this economy are informal, so that when we craft policies and strategies, they respond to that environment. Small enterprises require an environment where they will get cheaper electricity or energy for their production. Small enterprises require space enough to optimally utilize their workforce. The example that Dawie puts, if a worker says, we should do this thing today because it must be in the market tomorrow, that should be the case. Because the moment the workers commit to being productive, to doing this thing today, optimal utilization of resources, mitigate waste, the company becomes competitive. And once it is competitive, it is sustainable, it can reinvest some of the profits in growing the company. And then the principle should be, we should share the benefits of productivity. Once this is put on the table, one issue that we propagate as Productivity South Africa, it's workplace collaboration. Management and workers should shape the destiny of this company. It is in their hands for the success of this company. And it is within that environment that workers would be able to know we have not made a profit, therefore we cannot demand a wage increase. They understand what is happening on the ground. Equally so, when they put an effort and their profits are growing, it is justified that the proceeds are equitably distributed. Those who invested capital should get a return on their investment, and the workers should get a return on their labor. So once we allow this to happen at factory level, those are the beginning signs of a turning economy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that input. And I think we can stay for a few more minutes on this, Dawie. I don't know what your thoughts are on downgrading ourselves and downgrading our thinking, and that's government and corporate.
Yeah.
We need a downgrade.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of that? You don't want an upgrade here. You need a downgrade of things in order for the economy to thrive.
Yeah. I think the point I'm trying to make, and I think that is what you're referring to, is that we try to implement certain standards. We try to protect workers in South Africa. We try to protect people. And there's legislation like, for example, minimum wages, which I think is very, very wrong for a country like South Africa, for example, because there are many people that are prepared. And again, I don't want people to be poor. I don't want people to be exploited. But there's something much worse than being exploited, and that is not being exploited. So we have to do things like, for example, get rid of this minimum wages that we have in South Africa and allow people to take the job what they can get. Because if you want a good job, the best way of getting a good job is to get a job to start off with. And having said that, actually, you know, and I did mention that the efficiency of South Africa's government is horrible. The state is basically collapsing at many, many levels in South Africa. And we can just look at the local authorities, for example. But because the state is collapsing, there's actually a wonderful opportunity for smaller businesses as well. And I'm not talking about basic things only. I'm talking about quite sophisticated things. A good example is, for example, education. The schools have been quite often the last year the schools have been closed because of COVID. And all of a sudden you get this new way of teaching children that you can make use of what we're doing now, sort of technology and to teach children. And you can actually, the private sector, there are many opportunities now, and the private sector is using this opportunity to provide certain services related to education. That's a very good example. Here's another very good example of where a collapsing state is actually creating opportunities, and that is insecurity. Remember, the primary function of a state is to protect the people and to protect their stuff. No, the South African government is just not capable of doing that. The last couple of days is a very good example of that. But there's another opportunity here, and that is the security industry, for example. There are 3 times as many private sector security officials in South Africa than police. So there's another example. So in a perverse kind of way, a collapsing state in South Africa is actually creating opportunities at many, many levels, and many people are actually using these opportunities to start their own little businesses. And that's what I've said earlier. A small business is not necessarily a place where you sell some tomatoes on the corner of the street. A small business can be to be an educator. It can be to be involved in security. It can be to be involved in some technological company somewhere working from home, or whatever the case might be. So perhaps we have to look different at small businesses as only a little shop where people sell something.
And you and I are having this conversation, but it shouldn't really be you and I having this conversation, because what you're talking about is the way in which people think about how they can earn a living. So when we say SME, I think the word is way too light. It says nothing. But if we can have citizens who can see opportunities, and I agree with you fully, the supply chain has been hugely disturbed. Yesterday, I went to the corner store and there was no bread, but the local bakery somehow upped their baking, and all of us were there to get, this local bread. It's not cut, which is not great for because we know cut bread is key. But it was fresh bread, it was bread, and it was there. So how do you think we're going to infuse this? Dawie, how do you think we're going to change the mindset of people to see opportunity and to find it? Because I've worked in communities. It is difficult because the thinking is not there.
Yes, I think part of what we need to do as well, and again that has to do with education in this instance, and that's a value set. We have to create a value set in South Africa that makes it possible for smaller businesses to become medium businesses and to become big businesses, and smaller businesses not necessarily doing only primary stuff, but getting involved in a tertiary economy as well, and that has to do with the value set. On our schools, we have to teach our kids that you have to respect other people. You have to respect other people's stuff as well. You cannot steal things, for example. That's the kind of values that we have to create in South Africa. We also have to create the value in telling people and our children. We have to start with our children that anybody that is involved in a business is actually a hero. And it doesn't matter what kind of business he's involved in. Anybody that actually successful running his own business is a hero. And I think the Americans did it well. There's even a saying, the American spirit, as an example. We don't have that in South Africa. All of us, we always look at government. Government must help me. Government must provide A, B, and C. The primary function, like I've said earlier, for government is to provide law and order. That's the primary function. They must do that firstly. And then in most of the cases, they simply have to get out of the way. But I think we don't have the respect quite often for small businesses, for other people's property and stuff like that. So I think there's a value thing that we are missing in South Africa as well. And our political leaders actually have to lead by saying, listen, other people and businesses and wealth creation is actually what we want, and that we need that, and we have to teach our children to respect people in business as well. And government needs to remove the obstacles. They don't necessarily have to support small businesses, but they have to remove the obstacles in the bay of business generally in South Africa. But it's a value system, I think, which is important, and that starts with a proper schooling system as well.
Love
Zanella,
it. Value. Yes.
To put 2 things on the table.
Go for it.
There's one simple example I want to advance. In Atteridgeville, Pretoria, most area that is with shacks and so on, there are young people who saw an opportunity. And just by the street size, they have started small factories to produce bricks. Very informal. Where do they get their electricity? They go to Gogo Dlamini next door. They connect and they pay Gogo Dlamini for that electricity. Gogo Dlamini has got something to put on the table because of this small operation. These young people employ 2-3 people to produce these bricks, and they sell to their area. That's what we call production at a local level.
Yeah.
That's what should be promoted. We should not be seeing government, including local government, going there and disrupting that operation. That's one simple thing at a local level. At a national level, the issue, you raised the issue about the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. One key thing in there is industrialization and local production. And one emerging thinking and collective thinking is the issue of the sector master plans. And I had an opportunity to see the leadership of business, be it in the clothing and sector, be it in the manufacturing sector, beginning to say to government, this is what we want for our sectors to grow. And they've coined something like bring and buy. So business come and say, this is what we want done. Government create that environment for us to thrive. Now, what I'm advocating is we should support those sector master plans, should put all our energies, as I said, both business, government, academia. Let's put our thinking behind this so that we don't do too many things and come out with nothing. All we need to do as South Africa is to focus on the 5-6 sectors that has a multiplier effect, pull all our energies into that, do it well. This economy in the next 5 years will begin to show signs of growth. Those are the two possibilities I'm talking about. If we have to realize that we are an emerging and developing economy and our enterprises are mostly in the informal space, let's do the fundamentals. Let's forget about this rhetoric and all sorts of things. Focus on doing the right things at the right time in the right way. And that will change the fortunes of small enterprises in this economy and the country.
Super. Yeah. Over to you, Dawie.
Yeah, I just want to make 2 points as well, and it's slightly off the topic, but I think it's very important because this thing that we call the economy is interlinked. Everything that affects everything else. Now, the one point I want to make is that if you look at the immigrants from the rest of Africa in South Africa, and there's a number of studies have been done about this, you will find, like, for example, there was a study done in a community, mostly from Somalia, and the result of that study was that there was very, very low levels of unemployment in the Somalian community. So somehow, and I don't think they're better, but there's something in many immigrant communities in South Africa that's different from the South African communities, and somehow they make it happen. It works for them. And again, I think that's a value system as well. And what is the difference between the value system that many of these communities have and what we have in South Africa? And one thing stands out for me, and that's the role of fathers in households. Many of our children simply grow up without a father. And of course, mothers are very important. I'm not trying suggesting mothers are not important, but fathers are crucially important. We don't have families anymore in South Africa. It is important for children to grow up in a family with a mother and a father. And there are many, many studies out there that proves that it's important to have both parents at home. And that's another value thing that we need to fix in South Africa, the importance of fathers and the importance of, like we said so many times, skills development, especially skills development for girls. That is crucially important for a growing economy as well. But those are 2 points I just want to mention. The immigrant community quite often doing much better, and the family in South Africa that is pretty much fallen apart.
And what you're talking to, I think we don't often think about economics looking at the basics and the fundamentals like that. And for me, what are some of the key points that you've made around what's government's role and how do we, and we have this conversation all the time, what are the lanes that government should be on and how should they get onto those lanes and stick to them? And then on top of that, how do we enable and change the thinking of people in society for them to understand how they can enable themselves to participate? And of course, government creating an enabling environment, and also around the major areas that government is focusing on to rejuvenate the economy. So I think it's been a very fantastic conversation. I do want to stop it here if you're happy with that. I thought it was very insightful. I can't wait to see the tweets. I wish I could have access to those. Dawie, thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you again soon. And Mr. Mothiba, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, if you thought that was a hot conversation, wait for the lineup for the rest of the day. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Challenging the way in which we think about empowering the SME. Sometimes I suppose the topic sounds as if it's going to be one that's purely inspirational on how can we enable it. But then we actually start to unpack what the challenges are. And there are many challenges we are facing. I hope we are at the tipping point now and we're not waiting for a tipping point later. And we can actually start to rethink our economy and our participation as corporate, as individual citizens, as well as government. But again, I suppose we also love to pull up that one person who's doing it quite differently. What I really like about our next speaker, Theo Ballou, was his entire journey, not just where he's at now. Because oftentimes we don't understand the qualifier that is required or the qualifying steps that are required to do something that he's done, and the passion behind it, and the absolute focus, and the focus on self-development and self-skilling, and holding a very high standard. So let me not speak on his behalf. Let's move on through to Theo Ballou, who is the founder of Bathu Shoes and the top 20 entrepreneur of the year. So over to you, Theo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zanele, for the lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Theo Ballou. I'm the founder of Africa's premium sneaker brand, Bathu. We started our business in a room in LX with a vision to build a shoe brand that Africans can proudly affiliate with. And right at the core of our mission is to reignite hope and create sustainable jobs. I'm an accountant by profession, worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers for about 5 years, 2 years in South Africa and 3 years in the Middle East. While traveling between South Africa and the Middle East, I was on my way to Saudi Arabia and had an 8-hour layover at the duty-free Dubai airport. And on that day, there was this retail store that had so much traffic, footprint into their store. And I went on to check what's really happening there. And I was quite fortunate to have had the conversation with the owner as he was present at the store. And we spoke about what his brand promise is about and what his brand stands for. On my connection flight to Saudi Arabia, I realized how his brand resonated with the French community or people from France. And I started asking myself, what are we doing as Africans to tell our own story, to narrate our own stories to the world, to really take our own heritage and embody it into product and service offerings that the rest of the world can receive? Talking about product and service offerings, at the time, I used to buy a lot of sneakers to a point that at the end of 2015, I had such a valuable collection of sneakers. But something was missing. A sneaker brand that is from Africa, or out of that collection, something that resonated with Africans. And all the time when I had to come back home to South Africa visiting Alex, either on summer holidays or at festive season holidays, I would have a talk with a lot of our people in the community. And I realized that a lot of them are suffering. A lot of them are unemployed. And when you really look at the core reason, it's not because of they're lazy or anything. It's just mainly because a lot of them don't have the opportunities that we've gotten. And I thought about it. Am I going to blame the government? Am I going to blame corporate South Africa? Or I'm going to take it upon myself to initiate the opportunities for them, to create opportunities for them. One of the interesting facts from my 18 months of research was that we've got 7 continents in the world. You look at South America, Brazil to be specific, they've got 2 major sneaker brands or footwear brands, which is Ipanema and Havanians. You look at the States, they've got Nike started by Phil Knight. They've got Under Armour started by Kevin Plank, Converse started by Chuck Taylor, and many other European shoe brands, including Puma and Adidas, and many other Italian footwear brands. But we don't have a sneaker brand or footwear brand in Africa that can be benchmarked with those international footwear brands. I thought about it. Let me start a sneaker brand that Africans can proudly feel. Africa is known to be a continent that is filled with a lot of heritage and diversity, different ways of speaking, different ways of clothing, different ways of eating. Why not take that diversity and heritage, incorporate it into value chains, into ecosystem, even into product and service offerings that the rest of the world can receive? And that's what we are doing with Bathu. Because the word Bathu is a word that has existed in South Africa for centuries. Way before democracy, in the days of Sophia Town. It's a word that is used as a slang word to refer to any type of a shoe. It was used as in a language called the Tsotsital, which today's generation will call it slang, to refer to any type of a shoe. They will always to refer to a formal shoe, a sneaker, or a nice shoe as Bathu. The beauty about Bathu going to South African heritage is that even when you have 11 official languages, so many different townships, from Soweto to Tembisa to Gugulethu, Bathu. You don't have to speak Tswana, Ndebele, Zulu to know what Bathu is. And I thought about it. Why not conceptualize this beautiful untold South African story into a sneaker brand that shows the unity that we have as Africans? Long story short, as I've already mentioned, I had the privilege and opportunity to work for a great firm that also given me an opportunity to be seconded in the Middle East. Then I used all my savings that I've gotten from my job as seed capital. I worked for 5 years and I've been saving for the last 5 years when I was in corporate. I took all of it, all my savings, withdrawn all of them and invested into my idea. Took a risk and invested into my idea, meaning that if this Bathu idea didn't work, I would have lost all my savings. The journey wasn't easy because in 2015, there was a trend around socks that was happening, colorful socks, which was mainly dominated by a brand called Happy Socks. Then I realized that if I want to create and build a shoe brand that Africans can proudly affiliate with, I cannot just replicate a design. I cannot just copy the existing designs in the market. I need to come up with an innovative, cool factor shoe. And how do I contribute to trend and take advantage of the trend? I realized that a lot of people, when they're wearing their colorful socks, they can only show their colorful socks when they sit down and the trouser goes up or when they're wearing shorts. So, Theo, why not come up with a happy shoe? A shoe that can show people's socks when they're wearing them. At the same time, having ventilation, into your feet when clients are wearing them. I've never seen such a sneaker, but I thought about it. And when I approached the factories in Durban, because they declined me because in footwear manufacturing, mesh addition or the mesh material is used as a component of a shoe, either on top, on the side, or at the back. And for me, I had a concept of building an entire shoe with mesh material. Footwear manufacturing, that has never been done before. They declined me about 13 times. Finally, I got approval when I flew down to Durban to meet the owner and convince them that my idea can work. We did about 21 samples, mainly because we wanted to ensure that our shoe is of quality. The sample number 4 that we did was not of great quality. The sample number 8 that we did was not of great quality. Sample number 18 was not of great quality until we got to sample number 21, where we ticked all the quality boxes or quality checks. And that's when we started the brand. Another hurdle was that I couldn't meet the minimum order quantity at the factory. I had to start with 100 pairs. They believed in my idea to a point that even though they were not going to make profit, I was not going to make profit from the proof of concept, they still incurred costs with their labor, cost with the electricity, and switched on their machine to manufacture 100 pairs. A week later to be specific, I came back and placed an order for 400 because I sold 100 pairs in a week. Then I went on to manufacture 1,000 pairs and 3,000 pairs. Left my job in the Middle East to come back home to be of service to my community. Being of service to my community, to date, we employ 230 people in our business. We've got 26 brick and mortar stores. We've got a warehouse that is 3,700 square meter in capacity, where we do all our means of production. And going to the strategy of our business, I thought about, if I really want to reignite hope for my people and create sustainable jobs, I need to be able to own the end-to-end value chain of my business, from the means of production to the warehouse facility, to the supply, distribution or supply chain, to how I retail my products, most importantly, to capturing the data of the consumer at the retail stores. Because I'll tell you why. When I decided to build and own the end-to-end value chain, I understood very well that from the means of production of my business, I will be able to create employment with the people that work at the factory. From the warehousing facility, I will be able to create employment because I need guys to come and do the QC at the factory and do packaging and barcoding on the boxes at the factory. And if I go and get my own truck, I will be able to employ someone to drive the truck. Not only that, but if I build my own retail stores, I will get to employ someone to work at the retail store and sell the consumer, sell the products. We are a business that has never been funded by anyone, neither the public or private sector, venture or private equities. Started using my savings as seed capital to start the business. Not even a single financial obligation from the financial institutions in the form of debt or loan and any other form of funding. Because as an accountant myself, I worked on a few projects within the firm. Some of them were in deals, in mergers and acquisitions. And I've always seen this with a lot of businesses when they start scaling their business, that they sell an equity or debt or stake, either in a form of debt or equity. We see it a lot happening in Silicon Valley with the tech companies. When they start scaling the business, they sell equity. So it was a passion, I think, business for me and a passion exercise for me to do, as I believe that, I can really build a business 100% equity and build the end-to-end value chain. And over the years, our work has been awarded, from being on the Forbes 30 Under 30, from being the top empowerment young entrepreneur of the year, being the top empowerment young professional of the year, businessman of the year, an accolade that is also very close to my heart, which is transformation champion of the year that we've gotten over the years at the BBQ Awards. For me, that was really important because it speaks to how we've transformed our community. Out of the 230 people that we employ in our business, 80% of them come from previously disadvantaged communities. And there's many other beautiful stories from how we transformed these people in our community or transformed our communities. Because we've got people that started with us as warehouse packers. Today, they are warehouse supervisors. We've got people who started with us as drivers. Today, they're running our e-commerce platform. We've got people that started with us at reception. Now, today, they're part of our marketing team. We've got people that started through this business. Now they are part of our intention programs, from human capital to marketing departments. We've got people in our business that have built homes for their parents, people who have erected tombstones for their loved ones, people who own their first car, who bought their first cars. Some of them are even in their third cars through this business. And that all started with an idea to build a sneaker brand that Africans can proudly affiliate with. And at the core of our mission to reignite hope and create sustainable jobs. I often say this to people, that I left one job that provided for me and my family, tax-free salary in Dubai, and started a business that provided for 230 plus more families. And for me, that is a decision that I've taken to leave it all and to come back home in a room in LX and be of service to my community. Our brand promise talks about walking your journey. We want to be a shoe of choice in and shoe brand that accommodates everyone who's on a journey to reignite hope, a journey to follow your dreams, a journey to impact change in your community, a journey to be the president, a journey to be a doctor one day. We're saying to our consumers that if you're in a journey of greatness, we want to be a shoe of choice on your journey. Because think about it, you don't put in a shoe unless you go somewhere. There's been a big manifesto in South Africa around education being for free or free education. And we are in support of that. And with our CSR, we carry the same manifesto to support the bigger mandate of free education, that if education should be for free, school shoes have to be free as well to support our future leaders. And then we as a sneaker brand, we are taking a lead in ensuring that kids receive school shoes for free at no charge. Thank you guys for being a part of my talk. I truly appreciate it. And thank you to Top Empowerment for the invitation. Thank you.
So many other things that she does. I mean, let's go have the conversation. You'll see for yourselves.